Mediterranean. It means it's in the middle of the land of North Africa and such. And in the early days of Christianity, North Africa was a Christian world. St. Augustine of Hippo was a city in North Africa. North Africa is a Christian world until around the 700s, and the Muslims, till the next 300 years, wiped out Christianity, except a little in Egypt. And beheaded Christians and piled their heads in front of the town gate. So this beheading, see, is not something new. It's really going back to saying we're going to do what we used to do. And that's what precipitated the Crusades, because of all the mass killing of Christians. But Africa was a Christian world until it was slaughtered. Now, but notice the eastern edge, the eastern edge, you should notice the top part, even today, is part of Turkey. The top part, you don't see it perfectly here, but this part is Turkey. Turkey dips down. The top part of the eastern edge is Turkey. And then we have Syria a little bit and Lebanon. So we have Turkey, Syria, and Lebanon. Syria is really the top third. Lebanon is the middle third. Israel's the bottom third. A little bit of Turkey, but Syria, but Lebanon, Syria, Lebanon, the middle, and Israel. Syria, Lebanon, Israel. Okay, next. Okay, we'll look at this for a moment. We'll have a break, then we'll finish. Basically, Israel today is the same as it was in Bible times. If we sucked up all the water of the world, and then God allowed it to rain again, you'd have water in the same places. Because water flows just to the lowest spot. Water flows to the lowest spot. And here, notice, we have the tribe of Dan, and the Jordan River flows into the Dead Sea, and there's no outlet to the Dead Sea. The Dead Sea is 10 miles by 50 miles. 10 by 50? Yeah. I think I asked that as a question. I asked questions like, the Dead Sea is like A, 10 by 50, B, 100 by 1,000. Silly. Or 2 miles by 8 miles. You know, I mean, it's... But the Dead Sea, you should remember, is 10 by 50. Now, because, see, water, when it rains, it actually rains fresh, sterile water, because water, when it's evaporated, it evaporates water molecules, and water molecules are lighter than the average air mixture with nitrogen, because clouds are up there, otherwise clouds would all be at the bottom. And when it rains sterile, because basically when it evaporates, God has this beautiful system. The bacteria, even viruses, are too big to evaporate up. So water can evaporate out of trash water, dirty water, filthy water, poison water, and go into the clouds, and none of the dirt is taken up, and then it rains sterile water. Unless you get it from your rooftop, it runs off the roof. Acid rain means that the sterile water is going through smoke, you know, from a smokestack from a factory, sulfur, and then you get like a light sulfuric acid is acid rain. But they found that tomatoes grow better in acid rain. Wow, that's not a question. But notice that the water that rains throughout Israel goes through the ground and it picks up salt. as it goes to the ground, it picks up nitrogen salts and potassium salts, and they get into the water. And then when it goes down to the Dead Sea, it evaporates, but the salt stays there. So the Dead Sea gets saltier every day. However, there's not even, unless it's a couple hundred years, you don't notice the difference. But the Dead Sea is super saturated with salt. And so you've heard you can float in the Dead Sea and you don't sink. And you really can't. When I would try to stay vertical in the Dead Sea, boy, your legs would immediately shoot up. You can't, but the water is pretty sour, so you know some people try to taste it and they go, it's horrible. It's potassium salts. But now Israel found, of course, that there's a mine of money in that, because potassium and makes good fertilizer, it also makes gunpowder, and they would take the water from the Dead Sea and get the salts out of it. And that's one of the big businesses. They use it for fertilizer, for ammunition, and for beauty products. For beauty products. So if your skin needs a little potassium, they sell you creams and all that. Anyway, now the Dead Sea, because it's lower, is the surface of the Dead Sea is the lowest spot on the earth. The surface of the Dead Sea is the lowest spot on the earth. It's minus 1,300 feet below sea level. It's 1,300 feet below sea level. Some people have thought of making a canal from the coast here into the Dead Sea. Well, the water would drop from sea level, 1,300 feet. You'd have enough hydroelectric power, of course, to run the whole country 100 times. But, you know, there's problems, there's arguments, and so they haven't yet done it. But the Bible says in Ezekiel, hey guys, the Bible says in Ezekiel that there'll be fresh water someday in the Dead Sea. That God will, in the millennium, straighten it out. But now, minus 1,300 feet. When one time I had a commercial pilot's license, and would you believe it, one of the questions on the United States commercial pilot exam, they showed you an altimeter, and they said, you know, what's the altitude? And it was the Dead Sea, it was minus 1,300 feet. But who would ever think of that? You know, who's going to be flying there and not know you're below sea level? But it's below sea level, minus 1,300 feet, and by coincidence, it's about 1,300 feet deep. Yeah, but now, notice the top 3/4 of the Dead Sea, that goes into the deep trough. Just like that shape, like, well, this shape. But now the bottom is very superficial. The bottom of the Dead Sea, certain maps make it seem like it's almost not part of the Dead Sea, and they've been draining some water to get salts, and some people have thought that Sodom and Gomorrah were in this area. And I'll talk about that later. Sodom and Gomorrah were in this area. But the Jordan flows down. The Sea of Galilee, the surface of the Sea of Galilee is 690 feet below sea level. We're talking about the top of the water now. When you get in the Sea of Galilee in a boat, you're 690 feet below sea level. Now be very careful when you look at some maps, because some maps will have, you'll usually see a minus in front of the number, but some maps will have it in meters. So, you know, you might say, oh, Cohen said it was 690, look, it's only 200. But no, they're giving meters or something. See, they're giving meters. So you want to be careful. In fact, we had you heard of the fortress of Masada, right here on the Dead Sea? This is where the Jews, after the fall of Jerusalem in 70 AD to 72, 900 Jews went to Masada to hide. Herod built a fortress of Masada. See where Masada is? Masada is a plateau, 1,300 feet high, as high as the Empire State Building. The Empire State Building is 1,350 feet high. Herod said he wanted a fortress there, And so they built a fortress on Masada, 1,300 feet high as the Empire State Building, and that's where 900 Jews went to get away from the Romans when Jerusalem fell. The Romans, of course, would be denied, and for 2 years the Roman legion surrounded it. Finally, they built a ramp up, took 2 years, and when they went up to fight the 900 Jews, they were all dead. They committed suicide. It's a shame. A mass suicide. They said, rather than fall in the hands of the Romans, we'll die. So just like, Jamestown, whatever, Guyana, the Masada, the Jewish soldiers swear allegiance to the army at Masada. And they swear Masada will not fall again. But by the way, in one of my books, I wrote that Masada was 1,300 feet high. I've been there plenty of times. It is 1,300 feet high. How high is it? You look down and it's as high as the Empire State Building. I mean, that's really high. And Herod actually built a castle there. I'll show you some pictures later tomorrow. Because Herod he was the great builder. You know, Herod was a rotten guy, Herod the Great. The rotten guys get the big buildings built. The nice people, see, I'm nice. Hey, do you want to work today, guys? Oh, the guys don't want to work today. It's too hot, Tommy. Okay. Sandwiches for everybody. We'll start tomorrow. But you have a Herod who says anybody who doesn't work will have their, will be stabbed or thrown off Masada. Everybody works. So Herod was not only the great murderer of Palestine, he's a great builder. Because sometimes mean people get it done. But it still doesn't pay to be mean. And you don't want to work for a mean person. No. But anyway, I wrote in one of my books that the Masada is 1,300 feet high. And Moody Press, I remember they called me and said, Dr. Cohen, we're going to correct a mistake. You said Masada is 1,300 feet high. Dr. Wolf, who checks the writings, he says you're wrong, it's 300 feet high. And the guy giggled a little, said, a little exaggeration, Gary? I said, no exaggeration, it's 1,300 feet high. He said, no, it's 300 feet high. I said, I've been there plenty of times. Have you? No. I said, has Dr. Wolf ever been there? Well, no, but he looks at the atlases. And I said, well, it's really 1,300 feet high. And they said, well, Gary, we like you. Honestly, this is what they said, but we're going to go with Dr. Wolf. Because he's pretty reliable. And I thought, how can they think that? I got Gilly Yadin's book. It's in Masada, 1,300 feet high. And he excavated, an archaeologist. Then I saw in the atlas the answer. Dr. Wolf was looking at his atlas that said 300 meters. He was looking at a number of meters. See, and I was giving it feet. And he just assumed that 300 meant feet. And that I put a 1 in front of it, maybe to make it look better. Okay. The Sea of Galilee. Now remember, the Dead Sea is 10 by 50. The Sea of Galilee is 7 by 14. 14 miles north, up and down, 10 miles, and we'll have a break soon. If anybody's thinking, but it's 7 by 14. Wind is blowing. Now, notice this. If it rains a lot for a couple years straight, the Sea of Galilee trough gets a little higher, so it can be 7.5 by 15, or even 8 by 16. If it doesn't rain for a couple years, the 7 wide, the water descends a little, see, into the trough, and it can be 6.5 by 13. So don't be disturbed if you look at a book and it says the Sea of Galilee, and we were there 6.5 by 13. Another guy says it's 8 by 16. Often it's one's copying from the other, if you measure it. Yeah. But the average is 7 by 14. And think of Isaiah 7:14. Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel, God with us. So Isaiah 7:14. And so when you look for distance up north in Israel, this is 7 by 14. Carmel is right here. See this city of Haifa? See where I'm circling Mount Carmel, where Elijah fought the prophets of Baal? We don't think it happened geologically, but it's as if God scooped out the Sea of Galilee, about 290 feet deep. Hey, Sea of Galilee, 290 feet deep. That means if you drop your watch off the boat, you'll never see it again. So, if God scooped out the Sea of Galilee and flipped it over, you'd have Mount Carmel. Mount Carmel's about the same shape and the same size as the Sea of Galilee. Now, Mount Carmel, Hebrew, and Canaan, Karem. What does anybody know what Carmel means? Modern candy.
Yeah.
Anybody knows? Please don't say at the break, oh, I knew that.
Tasty.
What does Carmel mean? Karem means vineyard. El is God. Vineyard of God. The grapes grew so well on that, it was called the vineyard of God. Karem El. Mount Karem El, Carmel. And we don't have, by the way, records of how things were pronounced years ago. So when you read the king names, just read them boldly. No one knows. What we do is we pronounce it the way we've heard. So St. Augustine, they used to say St. Augustine. So is it Augustine or Augustine? Who knows? The Greek city, I've heard Christians argue, is the Greek city Thessalonica or Thessalonica. But you go there, and all the Greeks pronounce it who live there, Thessaloniki. So you see, a lot of arguments, I think, among Christians can be that way. Two people are arguing, and actually in heaven, both were wrong. And some people talk like they've been there, like they were at the creation, and they tell you how it was. And they also, when they pick names for salvation, they talk about election. I mean, it's okay, but they talk like they were there, and they helped out. So you learn some positive sounding and loudness doesn't make it right. Okay, but anyway, 7 by 14, and you should notice the three big here's the Jordan in the middle, the three big rivers. This is the Yarmouk. You see that? They go eastward. The Yarmouk. The Yarmouk starts right below the Sea of Galilee, the Yarmouk, and here we see the Jabbok and the Arnon. See, three rivers come out of the Jordan. And I can even look at them, make sure I see it right. The Yarmouk, the Jabbok, the Arnon. Now, two things about the name, and then we will have the break. But Dan, when they divided the tribes, the tribe of Dan was given this area right here, which is the Philistine coast. The Philistine coast. The Philistines were a big people. They worshiped the god Dagon. Dagon is the word in Hebrew and Aramaic for fish. Dagon is fish. They were sea people, so they worshipped fish, the fish god. And they were strong, and the tribe of Dan just could not or did not have the faith to defeat the Philistines, the Canaanite Philistines, who lived on that coast. And because all the other land was divided by God, remember God gave each tribe a portion, because the land was divided up, Dan had no place to go, and at the end of the book of Judges, I think chapter 16 and 17, or 17 and 18, yeah, it says the tribe of Dan moved northward. They didn't have faith. All the other land was taken away, was given away already. So they went north of the Galilean tribes, and so Dan becomes the northernmost tribe. Becomes the northernmost tribe because it can't fight the Philistines in the land it was given on the southern coast. It gives up. They don't have the faith, and they go northward. The book of Judges shows they didn't have the faith either, and they weren't courageous, so they went northward. Now, in Hebrew, the verb to go down is yarad. Is anybody here named Jared? Anybody have a child, brother, sister named Jared, boyfriend? Pardon me? Your best friend's son. So we can move you up, but you're up already. Is Jared. Jared means it goes down. And in Hebrew, they say a verb first. In English, we say, I read. Okay, I read. But in Hebrew, they say, read I. John runs. But in Hebrew, they'll usually say, not always, but usually they'll say, runs John. And if they want to say, Bob hits Joe, I should have said, I'd say Bob loves Joe. They would say loves Bob Joe. They would assign an object at Joe. Loves Bob at Joe. And now, so to say, they said the water in this river runs down from Dan. See, it runs down from Dan. It goes from the north to the south. Opposite of the Nile, this water, the Nile, by the way, remember, runs from south to north.
Yes.
But the Jordan runs from the highland here, the mountains here, Mount Hermon, runs from north to south. So they said it comes down from Dan. And the verb to comes down is yarad. And so they would say, yarad Dan. That is, where does the water come from? Well, it comes down from Dan. Yeah, and so in Hebrew, yarad Dan means comes down Dan. And so Jordan, you see, is yarad Dan. Yarad Dan. Yeah, and we get Yardan. See, yarad Dan. Just as the verb for Dan comes down is the Jordan. I'm sure you get that.
Yes.
If anybody doesn't, the river's Jordan. And we just leave it. You ought to know for sure, where is Jerusalem? Jerusalem is 20 miles west. Erase that. In the army, when they made a mistake, you know what I don't know if you've been in the army, they'd say, as you were. That's right, always. But they'd say it harshly, like when I was a private, it'd be like, you made the mistake. The guy would say west, if he meant east, he'd say west. As you were, east. So, as you were. Jerusalem is 20 miles west of the top tip of the Dead Sea, of the northern part of the Dead Sea. Do you hear that? Jerusalem is 20 miles to the west, more than this makes it a little higher. Jerusalem is 20 miles west of the Dead Sea, at the top. West is best. Jerusalem is 20 miles west of the top of the Dead Sea. And Joppa, which means pretty, Joppa means pretty. Pronounced both Joppa and Jaffa. In fact, it's pronounced three ways. Joppa, Jaffa, and Jaffa. They pronounce it all three ways in Israel. How do they pronounce it? They pronounce it all three ways. And Jaffa is the pretty land, and that was the coast. And remember, Peter went there, and Jonah went there, and then to go to Tarshish. But in about 1915, some Jews settled there on a hill northwest of Joppa, and they settled in the springtime. And hill is Tel, spring is Aviv, the first month. So they called their settlement the hill of springtime. They were settling in the springtime on this hill, so they called it Tel Aviv. And of course, since then, Tel Aviv has become the giant's industrial and play city of Israel, and on the coast, and it swamps Joppa today. Swamps Joppa. They say in Israel, if you want to go for fun, you go to Tel Aviv. If you want to go for learning, you go to Haifa. the city, the Technion, and if you want to go for religion, you go to Jerusalem. Okay, let's take a 10-minute break, but please be back in 10 minutes, just because there's so much. But anyway, enjoy, 10-minute break.